Hello, my name is Gabby, and this is my presentation on Deaf West Theater. Deaf West Theater was founded in 1991 with the mission to directly improve and enrich the cultural lives of deaf and hard of hearing individuals who live in the Los Angeles area. 29 years later, Deaf West Theater is now recognized as the premier sign language theater in all of the United States. Deaf West presents a range of performances, including both classical and contemporary theater pieces. In 2016, Deaf West's revival of the hit musical Spring Awakening made its way to Broadway and was nominated for 3 Tony Awards, including Best Direction of a Musical and Best Revival of a Musical. They found similar success in 2004 with the revival of the musical Big River, which won a Tony Award for Honor of Excellence. For this presentation, I'll be focusing on Deaf West as a general company, but using their production of Spring Awakening as my dominant example for their style of theater. This is for a few reasons. For starters, the show was a massive success. Any quick research on Deaf West Theater will almost exclusively reveal photos and information about their production of Spring Awakening. Because of its success, stories from the cast and creative team from Spring Awakening are the most abundant sources of information on Deaf West, and how audiences have reacted to it. And because I watched the production in 2015 prior to the show's move to Broadway. And while I won't be focusing on my experience of watching a Deaf West production, it has given me an added avenue in which to analyze the theater company. In particular, Deaf West is unique because it features actors and talents who are deaf and hard of hearing, but also those from the hearing world. This makes the experience of being an audience member particularly interesting and multifaceted. In producing a Deaf West production, the script of the play needs to be interpreted. ASL isn't a verbatim translation of the English language, so simply signing every word spoken isn't exactly possible. Instead, sign language will be chosen that is similar or conveys a similar thematic meaning to what is being spoken on stage. And this is heightened when Deaf West produces a musical, because sign is chosen, then interpreted by actors in a very lyrical way that feels like dance. As a result of this, audience members who can hear can watch a Deaf West production and hear the words spoken while marveling at the beauty of sign, while deaf people are interpreting what is being signed on stage. Often what occurs is what is being spoken and what is being signed are two separate entities. And that may sound contradictory, but it actually adds depth to the language and story. There's not only one story being told on stage, there are two. Both the spoken word and the physical signing come together to tell a new, different, very full story, and members of the audience are able to interact and understand the show in a multitude of different ways, depending on their abilities both with sign and with hearing. When I was an audience member at a Deaf West production, it appeared to me that at least half of the audience were deaf or at least knew how to sign. In the talk back with the cast after the show, a lot of questions were posed in ASL. Applause was signed, and those of us who could hear caught on to this. The signing demanded our attention, and instead of noisily proclaiming our applause, we began to sign it. With the way Deaf West stages their theater, they're able to reach a fairly vast audience. Both members of the deaf community and people who can hear are able to witness, enjoy, and understand a production staged by Deaf West. This is because Deaf West takes a very unique approach to their performances. The inclusion of talking and signing is a feat of spectacle, but it's also incorporated into the thematic elements of each performance. All Deaf West productions feature deaf actors and actors who can hear and speak out loud as the voice for that actor. And still, this is done with specific intentions. Big River is a musical adaptation of Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and Deaf West first landed on Broadway with the revival of this musical. The actor playing Huck Finn was deaf. He was on stage signing. His speaking voice came from an actor who was talking and also playing the guitar, and that actor was dressed like Mark Twain. The man who gave Huck Finn a voice on the page is now physically giving him a voice on the stage, and that dramatic element can be interpreted in many ways, but it was done with intention. Similarly, the musical Spring Awakening is set in the late 19th century, but features rock music. The members of the cast are dressed in period clothing, but the actors who are singing and lending their voices to the deaf actors are dressed in more modern-day dress. They're much more punk rock and much less 1880s teenager. In an instance in Spring Awakening, the deaf actor portraying the character Moritz hands a cigarette to the actor who is speaking and singing his voice. That sort of staging is very common for Deaf West. The actor signing and the actor speaking are not disconnected. They're separate but not different, and the productions play with those performances to add another layer of depth into their shows. And Deaf West's particular success with Spring Awakening, I find, begins to explain a lot not only about the company's success, but is an indicator towards the historical success of theater as a whole. Theater has historically been a place where community was built. It was a pillar to the great community, serving as a way for the population to come together and feel that sense of catharsis. Deaf West has created a very similar sensation. Actors and audience members alike are able to celebrate the deaf community in a safe, positive environment, and deaf communities are able to come together at a Deaf West production and feel that sense of community. A few eras after the Greeks, the theatrical boom of the Renaissance created a similar phenomenon with community, but it also expanded it. In the Renaissance, for the first time, people from vastly different socioeconomic backgrounds were able to build community in the same place. Theater was not another object that fractured people based on their social status. Instead, it became a place which allowed them to come together. And now, at a Deaf West production, multiple communities are coming together. Deaf people in the audience find solace in one another, as do the deaf actors. They are able to experience theater in its most authentic fashion, not through projected subtitles or through an interpreter, but through the story spoken on stage. And this same story can be understood by those who can hear and don't know how to sign. Like the Renaissance, Deaf West does not fracture these two different populations. It ties them together. Deaf West also celebrates intersectionality, which is another way the theater company really highlights theater's most positive aspects. Queer theater found its roots by embracing intersectionality, and the same is true for feminist theater. They embrace the intersectionality while also creating a space for feminists and queer people to explore ideas, feel catharsis, and grow as a community. Sound familiar? Deaf West's Spring Awakening lacked a very notable racial intersectionality, but did intersect with other disabilities. Spring Awakening brought the first person in a wheelchair to ever perform on Broadway, Ali Stroker, who has now reached massive levels of Broadway fame. While also the actress playing the character Ilsa was finishing chemotherapy from her diagnosed breast cancer while working on the production of Spring Awakening, and that wasn't hidden either. In a pivotal scene, the actress removes her wig to reveal her mostly bald head. When she speaks the line, "When you finally wake up, I'm going to be lying on some trash heap," takes on an entirely different meaning because of this. Deaf West doesn't only feature intersectionality, it embraces it. It ties it into the thematic elements of the performance, and it creates more impactful theater because of it. And that element of intersectionality again ties into Deaf West's ability to celebrate theater's most positive attributes. Spring Awakening is a show about communication, but at its surface is a show about teenagers. All of us were once teenagers, or maybe still are, and can relate to the idea that teenagers are seen as outcasts in society. Very similarly to how people living with disabilities are seen as outcasts in society. In my research for this presentation, so many people asked the deaf actors, "How did you do a musical?" And the response was frequently, "Deaf people can dance. Deaf people can hold a beat. Deaf actors are actors." And the rhetoric, as they have explained, should not be, "How did you learn?" but instead, "How do we work together to learn and create this theater together?" In Deaf West, stage managers behind the scenes use different colored light to communicate with deaf actors backstage. Hearing actors squeeze the arms of deaf actors or pass particular props to other actors as a cue, since the deaf actors aren't always able to tell when a musical number starts or stops. Deaf West is created with deaf actors in the forefront, always. And ultimately, that is what Deaf West has become known for. The theater company has found astounding success and is praised by both the deaf and hearing communities and is paving the way for more mainstream theater to celebrate deaf actors and deaf stories. They stage their productions in a way that does not shy away from either the deaf or the hearing audience. And Deaf West creates theater that builds communities, that pushes boundaries, that promotes intersectionality. It celebrates a group of people that have often been seen as outcasts in society, not because of their lack of speech, but because they as a community have not been given a voice. Deaf West accepts the good and bad of deaf history and deaf culture and uses it to produce theater. Humor me for just one moment and watch this short clip from Spring Awakening. No sound, no dialogue, no nothing. Just watch it. It's groundbreaking, beautiful, phenomenal theater. With all that said, here are a few minor lessons in ASL and deaf culture in general. To begin, hearing impaired is a term which should not be used. Deaf people prefer deaf or hard of hearing. Stigma surrounding deafness is still very prevalent. The solution should not be to hear, to speak, to lip read. The solution should be to communicate in the most authentic way possible. So, when communicating with a deaf person, communicate with them in the way that they would like. They will tell you. And finally, in a Zoom-based world, I'm personally surprised that ASL hasn't become at least slightly more prevalent in the way we communicate. So here are a few signs that may be helpful to you on Zoom or just in general. This is hello. Hello. My name is, and then you'll sign the letters of your name. This is applause. Please. Thank you. This is yes. And no. Thank you.